I was on retreat last week at my beloved Greenbow House of Prayer in Middle Georgia. I've been going there for over 30 years, and there is no question it has been one of the most formative influences on my spiritual journey. This trip, however, was different. It was the first time I had gone since my dad died in August, and I traveled bringing a small container of his ashes to scatter in the place I love so much. It was an interesting journey. I felt nervous going through security at the airport. What if they wanted to inspect my bag more closely? What if I had to open the container and explain what I was carrying? I had researched that it was legal, but I didn't have a copy of the death certificate, and I imagined in advance what the verbal pleas would be that I would make to the TSA officer if mercy was needed. Luckily, the ashes came through the X-ray with no further attention, but it was different to know that I was traveling with them. I had them in my purse, so they attended a long-awaited reunion with a good friend from seminary over lunch. Her recent Parkinson's disease diagnosis felt adjacent to the journey I was on with my father. Our common mortality loomed larger than ever before. When I arrived at Greenbow, I realized I hadn't told anyone there of my plans to bring part of my dad with me. My spiritual director, Faye, asked me what I had in mind. I told her I wasn't sure, but believed it would come clear after some time spent in silence. The first thing I did was to place the small container of ashes in the chapel. I set them near the Mexican Madonna that is adjacent to an overflowing bowl of prayer intentions. I spent the next 2 days essentially sitting vigil with my father. It was the first time I'd had for real space and reflection. It was not muddled by any other tasks or funeral preparations. There were no words to be spoken. It was holy time. It was simple time. And in that sitting, I realized that my dad has always been at Greenbow for me. The very first time I pulled in the driveway, it reminded me of the farm he grew up on. The love and care I've received through all these decades at Greenbow was recognizable from the love and care I had received during summer visits from my grandmother. My dad's love of silence as a Quaker allowed me to recognize my spiritual home in this simple place out in the middle of rural Middle Georgia. The tears came during those days as they needed to, but mostly it was such a time of deep gratitude. I gave thanks for my dad and felt in a new way that, to quote the psalmist, he had watched over my goings out and my comings in. From my first breath to his last, he was there. And that was what allowed me to believe that God too might show up in my life in such a steadfast way. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. In just a few moments, we will have ashes placed on our foreheads to remind us of our own mortality. This year, I don't hear these words with sadness, but with renewed gratitude. Gratitude for the good gift of life. Gratitude for the people that have accompanied me on this earthly pilgrimage. Gratitude for our God, who so longs for us to know and be known as we travel. Increasingly, I think our ability to recognize the holy in our journey is a practice. The more we look, the more we see. When we take the time to pause, we see more. The longer the journey, the more connections we see in the rearview mirror of our life. The twists and turns on the road are not without their challenges. There is much that is hard in this life. To acknowledge that hardness is part of remembering that we are dust, and to dust we shall return. But the whole universe is made of that same stuff. And what a gift to know that level of connectedness with the beauty and wildness of creation. What a God we have, who is willing to become part of that dust in the incarnation of his Son, Jesus Christ. So as we imagine our hopes and desires for this Lent, what might ground you, both in the reality of life's suffering and its limits, but also point you towards hope and gratitude? Is it in acknowledging the grief of loss that is the cost of deep love? Is it perhaps relinquishing certain assumptions about what your life would be so you can more appreciate the gift of what is? We have made the first step on that journey this Lent by arriving here today, to both have the ashes placed on our head to remind us of our humanity, but then to return to the rail and receive the promise of Christ when we have the second time his presence given to our outstretched hands. We are all in a different place on the journey each year when we come back to this space, and that is part of the gift as well. To circle back to this place, whether it has been a year of drought or one of bountiful harvest, we prepare for the good news of Easter only through our acknowledgement of the hope that comes through a grounding in love and truth. Resurrection is only possible through the gate of Good Friday and Holy Saturday. The last morning of my retreat, I started with dear friends that live permanently at Greenbough. We gather each morning for morning prayer. We read the office. We hold a period of 20 minutes of silence, much like a Quaker meeting. We then read a portion of our shared rule of life, and then we moved in silence outside of the chapel. We went to the side store, and my friend Steve read the 121st Psalm, again being reminded of the blessing on our goings out and our comings in. Those words were enough as I gave thanks for my dad. I then opened the small container and placed the ashes in my palm, and I let them gradually drift down to the statue of Mary that is by a tree near that side entrance. There was no need for more, no additional words, just a deeply felt thank you and hugs with the people who shared the journey with us, a holy circle that honors the gift and price of love. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Amen.